On that sweltering night, the bar felt more like a silent battleground than just a place for fun. Chips and cards were the weapons of the warriors, but the atmosphere, though tense, was far from intimidating for an average player. The poker table was lit by cold lights, reflecting the harshness of the environment where the world's greatest champions had gathered to compete for what could be the biggest prize of the season. But something was different in that game. In the corner of the table, a man with little experience was about to do the unthinkable. He wasn't part of this world of poker stars. His life up to that point had been marked by financial struggles, sleepless nights spent worrying about bills he couldn't pay. The others, with their skeptical stares, knew enough to realize he didn't belong there, but none of them knew what truly motivated him. He wasn't just there to play. He was there to change his life. He was desperate. And sometimes the greatest strength someone can have is precisely that, desperation. He looked at his chips and saw more than just little pieces of plastic. He saw a future, or maybe the end of his if he failed. The dilemma was simple. Either he gave it all or he'd have nothing left. The weight of that decision was etched on the faces of those watching him. As the champions continued their game, the novice, eyes fixed on the cards, prepared for the move that could make history. He wasn't an experienced player, but he knew enough about risks. He knew that sometimes the only way out of a tough spot is paradoxically to risk it all. And that's exactly what he did. He looked at the dealer, took a deep breath, and with the confidence of someone who had already lost everything, made the bold move, all in. In an instant, silence fell over the room. All eyes turned to him, as if, for the first time, those champions noticed that a simple, ordinary man had made a radical decision that could change not only his fate, but the fate of everyone around him. The cards kept being dealt, but the audience remained absorbed in the audacity of his move. The novice was now the center of attention at the table, but what no one knew was that he wasn't just playing chips. He was playing with his life, and his move wasn't just about luck. It was a calculated move, based on something he knew the champions, with all their experience, would never see. The mystery had been set. A common man, with no expectations, making a move as bold as it was unexpected. Why would he do this? What else did he know that no one else knew? The tension was in the air, and the game had barely begun. As the tension in the casino mounted with the ongoing tournament, the protagonist's life story, behind the curtains of that grand stage, revealed a very different picture. He wasn't just a man trying his luck at poker. He was someone with a past full of challenges, frustrations, and above all, hopes for a fresh start. Like many others, he had been carried by life's circumstances to this point. And his last few dollars, now staked on a single hand, were more than colorful chips on the table. They were symbols of everything he had sacrificed to get here. His decision wasn't just on the tip of his tongue. It was the culmination of years of tough choices and desperate moments. Poker had, in that moment, become a reflection of his own life, full of bets, risks, and the fear of failure. But while he was there, risking everything, his family had no idea what was happening. His wife, who had always been his unwavering support, didn't even know he was in the tournament. For weeks, he had hidden his financial struggles from her, trying to maintain the appearance that everything was under control. After all, how do you tell the person you love that you're on the brink of bankruptcy, that everything you had was spent in a desperate attempt to regain your dignity? She knew about the problems, but she never imagined he would have the courage to take such a risky step, a move that could decide everything. To her, It all seemed like a ticking time bomb ready to explode, but with no idea when he finally revealed, in a heated conversation, that what he had most precious, his last dollars, were now in the hands of fate. The reaction was immediate: fear, distrust, and even a sense of betrayal. How could he do this? How could he risk everything he had in such an irreversible way? In her eyes, he was making an irrational decision, something reckless, and it was shaking the emotional balance of the entire family. It wasn't just the financial loss at stake, but their future, their dream of building something better. What do you do when hope seems to disappear in the face of such an extreme choice? She began to relive the past months when her husband had grown more distant, setting aside the affection, attention, and optimism that had always characterized their relationship. The weight of routine, unpaid bills, and an uncertain future was weighing more heavily on his shoulders, and she, unfortunately, felt increasingly estranged. There was a coldness in his eyes, a void she didn't know how to fill. The guilt ate at him, but he saw no way out, trapped in a snare he had created himself. Poker, that brightly lit room full of bets, emerged as his last hope, maybe the only one, to escape it all. But she couldn't know, that in that moment, he wasn't just playing poker. He was fighting for his life. And as much as she tried to understand his choice, there was something deeper driving him, a fear of failure so great that only a courageous, even irrational move could overcome it. Deep down, he knew he wasn't playing just to win. He was playing for the chance to start over. Every chip he bet wasn't just a piece of plastic, but a symbol of his inner struggle, a cry from someone who didn't know where else to turn for help. He needed to believe. He needed to hold on to something. And poker, this game of chance and skill, appeared as the perfect metaphor for his life. His wife's reaction was instinctive. She began to relive the hardest moments, when financial struggles seemed to swallow everything, and when he grew more withdrawn, becoming a stranger in his own home. Conversations grew shorter, silences longer. Their relationship was being consumed by an invisible weight, and she didn't know how to lighten the load. She loved this man, but she was losing trust in him. How could she trust someone who would make such a risky decision without consulting anyone, without thinking of the consequences? She felt he was losing sight of what truly mattered, and it broke her heart. At the same time, the husband, there at the tournament, had no idea how much he was leaving behind. He couldn't see the impact of his decision on the woman he loved, on the home they had built together, and on the dreams they were still trying to realize. His mind was focused on the cards and the bets, but his soul was empty, lost in the desperate search for a way to escape a fate he believed was inevitable. He saw himself, little by little, drifting away from the woman who had always supported him, not realizing that by risking it all, he was putting at risk not only his financial future, but also the emotional well-being of everyone around him. As he continued in the game, his thoughts were far away, fixed on the weight of the bets, the growing tension, and the fear of not winning. He knew that to overcome this crisis, he couldn't just be another player at the table. He needed somehow to make that moment count, something that would change his life forever. He didn't know it yet, but that night was about to become the most important night of all. It would be the night he took control of his life, or the night he lost everything. The game had been going on for hours, and the tension at the table was palpable. The protagonist, who at first was seen as just a simple amateur, was beginning to show an unexpected skill. The experienced players, used to the pressure of big tournaments, began to question themselves. Who was this rookie who seemed calmer and more focused with every hand? His posture, though simple, contrasted with the other players, who moved like hungry lions in search of their next prey. He was different. He didn't seem desperate, but rather calculated. Chips were piling up in front of him, and with each new round, he seemed to make more precise and assertive decisions. At the start, his behavior was like any inexperienced player's. He bet small, didn't take big risks. But contrary to what many thought, he wasn't lost in the game. He was just observing, waiting, studying. The protagonist's sharp gaze wasn't focused on the cards themselves, but on the reactions of the other players. He saw beyond what was visible. The fear, the anxiety, the little signs that revealed each of the champion's moves. Those veterans thought the rookie had no experience, but he was already soaking it all in. He knew that in a tournament like this, the game wasn't just about the cards, but about the people. Every gesture, every sigh, every facial expression was a clue that could be crucial. He didn't know it yet, but he was approaching the defining moment of his life, the moment when his lack of experience would become his greatest advantage. What started as simple observation was now turning into a strategy. He didn't know how to play like the champions, but he knew how to observe the champions. It was as if he had discovered a hidden truth, a way to win without needing to be the best technician at the game. He was using the weaknesses of each player as his advantage. He wasn't just looking for victory, but for something deeper, the chance to prove to himself that he was capable of more than anyone expected. And while the other competitors thought they were dealing with a rookie, in reality, they were dealing with someone who had more control over the situation than they realized. When the first big twist happened, no one saw it coming. The rookie, with an almost imperceptible smile, raised the bet and made a move that caught everyone off guard. A seemingly senseless play, a completely out-of-place bet. He didn't have many chips left, and that wasn't a secret to anyone. The bets were already high, and the table was full of champions who, with just a glance, could decipher any move. But the protagonist's play defied everything they knew. Instead of bowing to the pressure and acting cautiously, he took the risk. He put everything he had on the line, trusting his observation and his ability to read the table in a way none of them could. The moment he made the bet, the other players' reactions were immediate. A mix of skepticism and disdain. They laughed. How could an amateur, out of nowhere, make such a move? He was basically asking to be eliminated, but what seemed like a mistake, a completely nonsensical move, began to gain a new perspective. The truth was that the rookie had something the others didn't, a rare skill, maybe much more valuable than the technical skill of playing poker. He knew how to handle pressure. He wasn't stressing over the possibility of losing. He knew that if he were to lose, it wouldn't be just any way. And this confidence in his own control, something that seemed to be the key to everything, made him stand out. He wasn't just the rookie in a game full of giants. He was unknowingly turning into a true adversary. The rookie's initial move, as bold as it was only the beginning of a series of smart decisions that went unnoticed by most players. He began to gain confidence with each new hand, and that pushed him to take more risks. The audience around the table started to notice, and the experienced champions began to grow uneasy. Something was wrong, and they couldn't identify what it was. They began to wonder if they were dealing with an amateur player, or if there was a hidden strategy he was trying to disguise. The truth, however, was that the protagonist wasn't using any conventional strategy. He was just being more observant than any other player at the table. Unlike many who focused solely on the cards, he analyzed each player with a clinical eye. He observed every nervous twitch, every deep breath, every little signal they tried to hide. To him, the game was about human behavior, not just about the cards. The reactions of the other competitors began to show that they were being taken over by doubt. What was this player doing there? How did he get this far? He seemed like a rookie, but his decisions were turning out to be more accurate than anyone had imagined. When he made the next bold play, the players around the table started to ask themselves, did he know more than they were realizing? Were they being fooled by a rookie who had infiltrated, or was he just playing with luck? They were starting to feel uncomfortable, suspicious, and above all, destabilized. But the protagonist wasn't as concerned with what the others thought anymore. He had only one thing in mind. He had something no one else had, and that was control over his own confidence. He knew what he was doing, even if it was hard for the others to see. Doubt began to grow among the veterans, but they still didn't know what was coming. And as he prepared for the next move, the game was about to take a completely unexpected turn. The twists were just beginning, and the stakes, as he knew very well, were much higher than anyone realized. As the poker tournament unfolded and the tension around the table increased, the more experienced players began to notice something that had, up until that point, gone unnoticed. The rookie was far from being an amateur. Contrary to what everyone had assumed at first, his plays were beginning to show themselves as more than just pure luck. With each new bet, with each new hand, he seemed to have more control over the situation than any of the other participants. The pace of the game was shifting, and the sense of predictability that the champions had about the tournament was being shaken. The rookie, seemingly inexperienced, was performing better than many players with years of practice. But what was really happening? Doubt began to seep into the minds of the veterans, and soon the first investigations began, small questions thrown between suspicious glances. The first to realize that something was wrong was one of the most renowned players at the table, a veteran with decades of tournaments and an endless list of victories. He, who prided himself on his ability to read people and their moves, could no longer predict the rookie's moves. The latter, with his calm demeanor and unwavering confidence, was baffling everyone around him. The veteran, known for his meticulous analysis and sharp perception of patterns, observed that the rookie was playing much more to destabilize the others than to follow a traditional poker strategy. He noticed subtle details, signs of weakness in the other players, and used them to his advantage brilliantly. Not only was the rookie winning, but he was doing it without the others even realizing how he was doing it. This was when doubt began to grow, and the investigation started to take shape. The veterans began to discuss among themselves. Had the rookie done something out of the ordinary to get this far? Meanwhile, the curious gazes turned to the rookie, as if he were a piece of a puzzle that still didn't quite fit. Everyone had their own theories, but no one was willing to risk more than their own bet to discover the truth. Those moves that seemed like pure luck were now being analyzed through a critical lens. What had once seemed like a sequence of accidents was now becoming a series of impressive strategic decisions. He wasn't just relying on luck. He was using information astutely, and that, for the seasoned champions, was alarming. They were used to taking the reins of the game, controlling the pace of the bets, manipulating the situation in their favor. But the rookie seemed immune to this. He wasn't playing the game conventionally. He was making the game adjust to him, and that was breaking all expectations. The informal investigation, fueled by whispers and speculations, began to take a more formal direction. One of the more observant players, an imposing figure in the poker scene, began to trace a timeline of the rookie's plays. He analyzed each bet, each laugh, and even the rookie's size, looking for clues, small flaws, anything that indicated he wasn't there by chance. The analysis was meticulous, with almost obsessive focus on understanding how someone with no experience could perform so well in a world-class tournament. Each play, each decision, was reviewed and discussed in detail, trying to uncover something that could explain what was happening. But the more they investigated, the harder it became to find a flaw. The rookie, in his apparent naivety, was playing like a master. He was always ahead of everyone. His moves were bold, but not impulsive. He wasn't an amateur, but someone playing a much deeper game than the others realized. Meanwhile, the rookie didn't seem to notice the growing attention he was receiving. For him, the game was still simple. It was a battle of minds, a fight of cunning and perception. He was so focused on the table that he barely noticed the intrigued glances from the other players. To him, the real key to poker wasn't in the cards, but in the people. He knew that the only way to truly win was to understand what the others were doing, feel their emotions, and perceive what they were hiding. When the rookie looked one last time at his opponents, something in their expressions told him they were beginning to understand that there was something different about him. It was as if a layer of disguise had been removed, and now he was being analyzed like never before. But he wasn't intimidated. He knew what he was doing. He knew he was closer to his victory than he ever imagined. Meanwhile, the experienced players began questioning what they were really seeing. The rookie seemed to always be 2 steps ahead, anticipating the moves before the others even made them. He had accomplished something rare in poker. He was controlling the expectations, challenging the readings of others. They began to wonder if he had spent some time observing the game or if he was, in fact, more trained than he appeared. The search for answers began to intensify, but the discoveries were not what the others had expected. Instead of finding a flaw, a dirty tactic, or a mistake, what they found was evidence that the rookie was, in fact, being genuine. He hadn't cheated the game. He was simply playing better than everyone else. His ability to spot patterns, identify weaknesses, and capitalize on the other players' insecurities was making the competition much harder than they had imagined. The analysis of the rookie finally revealed what everyone feared. He was playing poker in a way no one had ever thought of. He was, in fact, turning the poker table into a stage for self-overcoming. Every move he made was a test to see how far he could go. He knew that to succeed, he needed to exploit the weaknesses of each player around him. But more important than that, he needed to trust his own intuition. And while the others were still wondering if he was just a simple amateur, he already knew what he needed to do. What seemed like a simple game of luck was now transforming into a battle of emotional and strategic intelligence. But how far could he go with this unique skill? The answer, as everyone was beginning to realize, wouldn't come just from the game. It would come from his own choices. As the tournament progressed, the rookie's presence at the table began to become more than just a curiosity for the other players. His unusual ability to read others and anticipate moves had caught the attention of the more experienced competitors. While some still doubted the seriousness of his plays, others started questioning whether there was more behind his calm and calculated demeanor than just luck. And that was precisely when the game started to shift. The rookie was no longer seen simply as an amateur or an intruder in the elite tournament, but as a true adversary. He had moved from the shadows of ignorance to the center of the table, where the spotlight was on him and his strategy. Among the veterans, there was one player, a former world champion, who watched the rookie's every move with a keen eye. His name was Eduardo, and he was known for his sharp mind and ability to read people. Eduardo, with his impassive playing posture and a victorious career few dared to question, was the first to realize that something was happening. He saw that the rookie was playing a different game. It wasn't just the confidence that set him apart, but a precision in his plays, a deep understanding of human psychology, something Eduardo knew well but few possessed. The rookie was reading the table, the expressions, the gestures, just as Eduardo did, and that didn't go unnoticed. Even Eduardo, normally untouchable and unbeatable, began to feel a slight discomfort. This wasn't normal. Eduardo started to suspect that the rookie had some trick up his sleeve, a hidden skill that was allowing him to perform so well against the champions. He began to investigate the rookie's background, trying to understand what had brought him here and what he was really doing at the table. During the tournament break, Eduardo approached one of the event organizers and asked discreet questions about the rookie's history. He wanted to know where he came from, how he had made it this far, and what he had done before becoming a poker player. When the organizer revealed that the rookie came from an ordinary life, with no major involvement in professional poker, Eduardo's suspicions intensified. How could someone with no experience in such big tournaments be playing with so much knowledge and skill? What was he hiding? While Eduardo conducted his investigation, the conversation among the other players also began to revolve around the rookie. But instead of open suspicions or accusations, what prevailed was doubt. How could someone with so little poker experience perform so well against the best in the world? There was something more, and the other players knew it. Some began trying to destabilize the rookie with subtle provocations, trying to see if he would falter or give any hint that he was, in fact, just lucky. They started making strategic comments, messing with his mind, wanting to see how he would react. However, the rookie remained calm. For him, the game wasn't about what the others thought of him. He was there to win, not to play a game of nerves. He knew that the biggest advantage he had over everyone there was his ability to keep his composure, to play under pressure without giving in to provocations. However, when one of the younger players, a promising talent, quietly asked one of the veterans whether he thought the rookie was using some kind of trick, the tension at the table increased. The question seemed innocent, but it carried an implicit accusation, and Eduardo didn't ignore it. The former champion, already with his own suspicions about the rookie, approached the young player and responded firmly, "If you start doubting the other players, you'll lose yourself in the game. What he has isn't a trick, it's control." But the seed of doubt had been planted, and soon it spread among the other participants. Every glance, every gesture seemed to be analyzed more closely. The rookie was no longer just facing a poker tournament. He was being studied, being watched. Now he was the focal point, not only of the game, but also of the speculations and theories of the other competitors. That's when an important figure at the table, a respected veteran named Thomas, decided to approach the rookie. Thomas, known as one of the best poker strategists in the world, wanted to understand what was happening. He had already noticed that the rookie was playing a much deeper game than anyone had expected, and he wanted to test that directly. In a risky move, Thomas approached the rookie and, with a cornered smile, commented, "I can't help but notice that you've been playing with impressive confidence. Something tells me you're not as inexperienced as you seem." The rookie, with his calm demeanor, looked at Thomas and responded, "Poker is more about the other players than about the cards, Thomas. I just adapt to them." Thomas, who was normally unbeatable at the table, felt a chill of discomfort. The rookie had given him an answer that at first glance seemed simple, but it contained a depth he couldn't ignore. With the atmosphere growing more charged with speculation and distrust, the rookie began to realize that the weight of his decisions was going beyond the bets. He wasn't just playing with the cards, he was playing with the perceptions of the other players. And that, at the poker table, meant everything. While the veterans discussed among themselves his ability, his possible hidden strategies, and his intentions, he remained steadfast. He knew that the hardest part wasn't winning the game, but keeping control of his image in front of a table full of champions. He was being challenged not only by the bets, but by the distrust of the others. And this pressure, as uncomfortable as it was, only strengthened his determination. The rookie knew he had to prove that he was on the same level, or even superior, to the other players. He had already shown that he could read the emotions and strategies of his opponents, and now he needed to go further, challenging the suspicions that were being cast upon him. The real battle wasn't against the cards, but against the perceptions, the assumptions, and above all, the fear that was spreading around him. As the tournament reached a critical point, the players were more than just physically exhausted. The stakes, now as high as the suspense in the room, became the focal point. The rookie, once just a figure of curiosity, had now become a real threat. Every move he made seemed carefully calculated, and the poker table, which once felt like familiar ground for the veterans, was now being challenged in ways they didn't know how to handle. The veterans, used to controlling situations and expectations, were starting to see that the rookie wasn't there by luck. He was there by skill, a skill none of them could fully identify or decipher. But how was he doing this? How was a player with no experience dominating so precisely? The truth, as it began to unfold, was that the rookie wasn't improvising or relying solely on luck. He was playing with a much deeper, more cunning strategy. The all-in he made, the risky move that initially seemed like an impulsive decision, wasn't a whim. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew that, in poker, like in life, what defines victory isn't just the cards in hand, but the ability to read others, to understand their fears, strengths, and weaknesses. The real turning point began to take shape when the rookie, during a break in the game, found himself in a brief moment of interaction with some of the key players. They were all aware that he had made it this far, not by mere chance, but by a rare ability for psychological manipulation. The rookie, without hesitation, began to reveal details of his life, perhaps not to justify himself, but to show that behind his seemingly impulsive gameplay was a strategic and focused mind. He told them that his journey up to this point hadn't been easy. Before arriving here, he lived an ordinary life, struggling financially, and for a long time felt he was on the sidelines of everything. But what he discovered, almost by accident, was that poker wasn't just a game of cards, but a game of human emotions. Unlike the other players, who focused solely on traditional strategies, the rookie began to delve into studying behavioral patterns, gestures, and how people react under pressure. He revealed, with a sincerity that left all the veterans intrigued, that he had spent months observing players in tournaments and even in private games. He studied poker, yes, but what motivated him, more than the cards, was human behavior. He knew that success in the game didn't rely solely on playing the best hands, but on controlling reactions, on understanding how others behaved under stress. This knowledge, more than any tactic, was at the core of his strategy. For him, every gesture, every heavy breath, every furtive glance from a player was a clue to the right move. The rookie wasn't a common player. He was a student of human psychology, and his moves weren't random, but the result of months of preparation and observation. The other players, especially the more experienced ones, listened intently to his words, but still couldn't believe that someone with so little experience could be so immersed in the game. They were used to confronting sharp minds, but this felt completely new. Some began to doubt their own perceptions, questioning if they were really dealing with a rookie, or if he had infiltrated with a much larger purpose.
The idea that the game was being manipulated, or that the rookie was using a hidden strategy, began to hover in the minds of everyone around the table. It was at this moment that the real confrontation began to unfold. The tension, which had until
now been concentrated on the bets, was now reflected in the glances and words exchanged between the players. Eduardo, the veteran former champion, was the first to speak up, with a cautious but firm posture. He, who had tried to maintain composure until now, was now looking at the rookie with a mix of respect and distrust. "Do you really think poker is just this? Just reading people? Where are the traditional game strategies, the mathematical probabilities that so many of us master?" he asked, his voice cutting through the tense air. The rookie, without hesitation, replied with a slight but relentless smile. "Math is important, of course, but what I've learned is that, in poker, probabilities are just part of the equation. The bigger part is knowing how others play their own game." Eduardo didn't know if what he was hearing was a valuable lesson or an attempt at manipulation, but he felt that the rookie was, in some way, more prepared than he appeared. The discussion that followed was tense, but revealing. Each player there was being forced to confront their own limitations and realize that the game had changed. The rookie wasn't just trying to survive among giants. He was challenging the very definition of what it meant to be a poker master. He was questioning everything the others believed to be true, that poker was only about cards and calculations, about probabilities and luck. But the rookie was proving in real time that there was more involved. He was showing that, at its core, victories weren't just about the right cards or the best plays, but about controlling the table, understanding the others, and mastering the psychological game. As the other players began to understand that they were dealing with something much more complex than they had imagined, the rookie, for his part, was calmer than ever. He knew that the biggest challenge wasn't making the right play, but continuing to be who he was, without letting the tension or the suspicions of others affect him. He wasn't there to prove anything to anyone. He was there to prove something, to himself, to show that even without experience, he could go far, defying the odds and surpassing expectations. What the other players still didn't know was that the rookie was about to make something much bolder. His next move, once again, would come as a huge surprise. An unexpected move that would change the course of the tournament and place him at the center of attention. Now, more than ever, the competition was clear. The poker game was no longer just about cards. It was about minds, about who could manipulate fate in their favor. The tournament had finally reached its peak. The cards were being dealt. But what truly mattered wasn't the colorful pieces of paper, but the hearts beating faster, the hands sweating, the eyes watching every movement. The atmosphere in the room was thick, as if the air itself had become denser, laden with the tension of knowing that everything was at stake. Every player knew this was the crucial moment, the final chance to take control of the game and claim victory. And the rookie, who once seemed like an insignificant piece in the tournament's machinery, was now about to face the greatest challenge of his life. His moment of decision had arrived. There was no turning back. Every move made up to that point, every calculated risk, every bet he had placed, had now brought him to the forefront of a confrontation that would define not only his future, but the fate of the tournament. Everything depended on one single hand. The final opponent was the great champion, an experienced player who, over years of victories, had earned respect and recognition. His name was synonymous with success, and he was feared at every poker table. His eyes, always cold and calculating, observed every move the rookie made with a mixture of disdain and caution. He had faced dozens of promising young players, but none of them seemed as challenging as the rookie who, up until then, he had seen as nothing more than a distraction. Now he knew this young man was playing a different game, and somehow that bothered him. How could someone with so little experience have come this far? What did he have that was special? What lay behind his unshakable confidence? The rookie, for his part, felt the pressure, but not the same way the others did. He wasn't there to prove anything to the other players or the crowd. He was only there to prove something to himself. He knew that when the cards were revealed, the outcome of his journey in the tournament would be decided, but he was ready. The tension at the table and in the room as a whole reached a critical point. The audience, which had once been murmuring with excitement, was now completely silent. The atmosphere was immersed in an absolute stillness, only interrupted by the sound of chips being pushed across the table and the whisper of nerves on edge. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. The rookie observed the champion across from him, showing no signs of nervousness, not drawing a visible line between his fear and his determination. He knew he had one shot to walk away a winner. It was now or never. There was no room for error. When the final winner was decided, he knew he would need to make a move that would change the course of his story. Throughout the game, he had become an enigmatic figure, defying expectations and baffling even the most experienced players. But this last hand would be different. He could no longer rely on his skill of observation or his reading of others. The final move would be a direct confrontation of wit, strategy, and pure courage. The champion across from him, with his long experience and sharp skills, would not be easily defeated. But the rookie had something he didn't have, the element of surprise. He wasn't there just to play the cards. He was there to play the people. As the rookie observed the champion, he noticed something the others had overlooked. The champion, in a moment of distraction, made a subtle gesture with his fingers, a slight movement that indicated hesitation, a weakness. To most players, it would have been irrelevant, just a brief lapse in the moment. But to the rookie, that small gesture was like a flame in the darkness. He knew exactly what he had to do. It was the perfect moment to make his boldest move. He looked at his cards, analyzed the situation, and with a barely perceptible sigh, made his decision. He confidently raised his chip, making a move that everyone expected, but no one was prepared for the impact it would cause. It was a high-risk move, but he was confident in his analysis. He was going all in, not out of impulse, but with a strategy that no one, not even the champion, could foresee. He wasn't just responding to the game anymore. He was imposing his own rhythm, setting the rules. The silence in the room was absolute. The other players, the spectators, all were now focused on every move. The tension grew exponentially. The champion looked at the rookie with an ironic smile, but deep down, he knew something was happening, something he could no longer control. He felt the weight of the rookie's move, the boldness of his decision. And for a moment, he questioned whether he could defeat him the same way he had defeated everyone else. But the champion, with his experience, didn't allow himself to be shaken. He was there to win. He wouldn't let the rookie's confidence destabilize him. But even so, the seed of doubt had been planted. As the champion reflected on the move, the rookie remained silent. There was nothing more to be said. He knew that the final card, the last bet, would decide everything. This was where he would reveal himself to everyone. But more importantly, this was where he would finally reveal himself to himself. He knew he could no longer hide his intentions. He wasn't playing to impress anymore, but to earn his own freedom. He didn't just want to win the tournament. He wanted to win himself. He wanted to prove that even without experience, he could be more than just an observer. He wanted to be the protagonist of his own story, and in that moment, he knew there was no turning back. The revelation of the cards came in the blink of an eye. The silence in the room was shattered by an explosion of reactions. The cards were on the table. What seemed like a bold and senseless move now revealed itself as a strategic and calculated play. The rookie, with his unflappable calm and unwavering confidence, had defeated the champion. He had won not just the game, but the very idea that experience was all it took to triumph. He had shown everyone, and himself, that poker wasn't just about cards and bets. It was about knowing when to risk everything, when to trust your own judgment, and when, finally, to become who you've always wanted to be. When the rookie stood up from the table, now victorious, a wave of applause filled the room. He looked at the other players, not with arrogance, but with a serene expression, as if he knew that moment, that victory, was more than just a triumph in a poker tournament. It was a milestone in his life, a personal achievement that transcended any material prize. He had proven, not just to others, but to himself, that it wasn't luck or skill that made a winner. It was the courage to give everything, even when the odds were against you. And in that moment, he knew he had won. The final hand of poker was decided. The rookie, with his courage and flawless strategy, won the tournament, surpassing the world's greatest champions and taking home the grand prize, the one many had dreamed of achieving throughout their careers. But, contrary to what many expected, his victory didn't come with a thunderous triumph or a display of pride. He didn't raise his arms or smile in ecstasy, as many champions often do. Instead, he simply stood there, looking at the table as if all of this were just another step in his journey, not the end of it. He knew he hadn't just won the tournament. That victory meant more than the value of the chips or the glory that a poker prize could bring. He had overcome not only the champions, but all the obstacles he had created for himself over the years. When he entered the tournament, he wasn't there to make friends or prove anything to anyone. He was there to save his financial life, to reclaim a dignity he felt he had lost over time. For him, poker wasn't just a card game. It was a last chance to restart, to rewrite his story. And by winning, he hadn't just claimed a trophy. He had earned the opportunity to rebuild himself as a man. When the prize was finally awarded, with applause and celebrations around him, he looked at the crowd and the other competitors. He knew his victory had made an impact, but not in the way many thought. For him, the greatest prize wasn't the money or the title. The greatest prize was what he had learned about himself throughout the process. He realized that life often requires us to make tough decisions, to take bold steps, to risk being vulnerable, and to face the situations that challenge us head-on. By betting it all, he hadn't just placed his chips on the table, he had placed his hopes, insecurities, and frustrations. And by winning, he knew he had taken the most important step toward his own transformation. But the victory didn't come without a cost. The rookie knew the emotional price of this journey had been high. He remembered the conversations with his wife, her concerns, the weight of having risked everything he loved most. He couldn't deny that, by taking that risk, he had affected more people than he'd like to admit. But the truth was, he needed to prove something to himself. He knew that life was full of risks, hard choices, and moments when the only way forward was to risk it all. And at that moment, He felt that the greatest reward wasn't the financial prize, but the trust he had earned in himself. He was no longer the lost, hopeless man who entered the tournament. He was someone who had learned to fight for himself, someone who now knew he could face any challenge. The justice of his victory wasn't just in the fact that he won the tournament, but in how he did it, honestly, without relying on luck or tricks. He had played with his mind and his ability to understand others, and that was what put him ahead. At a table where all the other players relied only on their experience and technical skill, the rookie had shown that, in the end, the game was much more about understanding human behavior than about cards or probabilities. He had played with his heart and mind, not just with his hands. He had been honest with himself and with the game. But true justice came when he reunited with his wife after the tournament. When she saw him, she felt a mix of relief, surprise, and pride. She knew he had taken an enormous risk, not just in poker, but in life itself. When he walked into their apartment, she ran to him, and before he could say anything, she hugged him tightly. He, wordless, simply hugged her back. He knew that victory meant nothing if he didn't have her support, and that by winning, he not only regained his own dignity, but also her trust in his judgment. She supported him, yes, but that bet, that pivotal moment, had been his. And now, he felt that, finally, she believed in him again. The rookie then looked at his wife and with a soft smile said, "I knew this was my moment. Not just for us, but for me." He had learned the most important lesson of all, that the greatest victory isn't about others, but about ourselves. He had faced his own fears, his insecurities, and now he was ready for the next chapter of his life. He knew that no matter what happened next, he had proven to himself that he was capable of giving everything. He no longer feared taking risks. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it head-on, knowing that in the end, the game of life is played just like poker, with courage, confidence, and, above all, the understanding that the most valuable victories come from within. The justice had been done. The rookie didn't just win the tournament, he won himself, proving that it doesn't matter where you come from or what your struggles are. What matters is what you're capable of when you decide to risk everything for something that truly matters. And in the end, when he held the prize in his hands, he knew the value of his victory was far greater than any trophy or monetary prize. He had proven that true strength comes from within, knowing that, even in the toughest situations, we can find a way to win, whether in poker or in life. The sound of the crowd, though muffled, still echoed in his mind as the rookie walked out of the tournament room. The lights flickered above him, but he no longer felt like part of the scene of glory and recognition. Instead of euphoria, what dominated his mind was a sense of relief mixed with something deeper. He wasn't celebrating like other champions would, with a burst of happiness or a display of triumph. Instead, he felt an unsettling peace, as if something inside him had been resolved, something that went beyond poker, beyond the prize. What he had achieved wasn't just the recognition of others, but an internal reconciliation, something he hadn't known he needed until that moment. As he walked through the casino halls, his thoughts began to wander. He remembered when he entered the tournament, how it all seemed like an absurd risk, something impulsive, a last-ditch effort to save himself from a financial abyss that seemed endless. He had started that day with nothing, and now, at the end, with the prize in his hand, it felt like he had everything. But did he really have everything? The money, the recognition, the victory. But what had he sacrificed along the way? What had he put at risk that couldn't be recovered? He thought of his wife, the tough days they had lived through together, the nights when he closed himself off in his world of frustration and despair, trying to find a way out. And now, that victory that seemed to have been won by sheer luck or boldness had a price. He knew that what mattered most wasn't what he had gained, but what he had learned in the process. Reaching his car, he paused for a moment and looked at the prize still in his hand, as if it were a foreign object. He had fought for it, but now the satisfaction he felt wasn't about the achievement. It was about the journey he had undergone. Poker wasn't just a card game. It was a metaphor for life. He had put everything he had on the line, and in the end he came out victorious. But he knew the real victory lay in the trust he had regained in himself. Throughout the tournament, he had rediscovered himself, finding strengths and abilities he hadn't even known he had. He was no longer the lost and disoriented man who entered the competition. He had transformed, not because of the prize, but because of the decisions he made, the courage he had to risk everything, and the way he faced each challenge with his head held high. When he finally got home, he was greeted by his wife, who awaited him with a cautious smile, but one full of love. She knew what this meant to him. She knew that, behind the victory, there was a man struggling to find his place in the world, someone trying to regain his confidence and hers. She didn't know if the prize would solve all their problems, but she knew that, in some way, the rookie had rediscovered himself. He looked at her, wordlessly, and she saw in his eyes something she hadn't seen in a long time: peace. He had finally found a way to rise again, and not just with the money, but with the certainty that, in the end, what he needed most was to believe he could overcome it all. As they sat together, he reflected on what that victory truly meant. It wasn't just about a sum of money, but something much deeper. He remembered the struggles he faced to get there, the sleepless nights, the anguish that consumed him while trying to find a way to overcome his own internal fight. He had risked everything, yes, but in doing so, he had proved to himself that life, like poker, is made up of choices, risks, and an eternal search for a chance to start over. He was no longer trapped by his old life, by the fear of failure, or by a sense of powerlessness. He had finally found meaning in his own choices. What he held in his hands now wasn't just the prize, but a new perspective on what it meant to risk everything and trust in his own ability to overcome. He looked at his wife and, with a lightness in his heart, said, "I knew this was my chance. Not just in poker, but in everything in life." And she, with a soft smile and an expression of understanding, replied, "I knew you could. I always knew." And at that moment, he felt that victory wasn't just in the chips he had placed on the table, but in the journey he had taken to get there. He knew that what mattered most wasn't what he had won, but what he had learned about himself. He knew that on some level he had always known that to win, he would have to risk everything. Now, he was ready to move forward. Not with the confidence of someone who had just won, but with the humility of someone who understands that, in life, the greatest prize isn't in what you achieve, but in how you face the challenges and difficulties that come your way. The game, like life, isn't about winning or losing. It's about having courage, making the right choices when the odds seem slim, and above all, knowing that in the end, the real victory is conquering trust in yourself. He now knew that any challenge, any adversity, could be overcome as long as he was willing to risk, fight, and believe that, even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to win. And he, more than ever, knew that poker was just a reflection of everything he had learned in life. Now, he could finally move forward with a calm heart, knowing that, by making the boldest bet of his life, he had won the greatest victory of all, the chance to start over.